You're listening to the Catholic Wives Desiring Peace podcast. Today's episode is about untangling the web of enmeshed relationships. Are you a Catholic wife grappling with challenging in-laws? The Catholic Wives Desiring Peace podcast is your sanctuary for navigating these sometimes stormy seas of life with toxic in-laws, while being validated for what you've experienced. Join me, your host, Miriam Susan, a Catholic wife who's weathered nearly 3 decades of in-law drama, as we tackle the tough issues you're dealing with head on. Hi, Miriam Susan here. Welcome to today's episode, where we are going to be talking about untangling the web of enmeshed relationships. So let's talk about what enmeshed relationships are. They are a situation where boundaries between family members are pretty blurry, and it leads to excessive emotional involvement and dependency. So think about just like gears kind of locking together and being stuck together. That's how I kind of imagine it being, is just a really enmeshed relationship where there's no real defined line between parents and children or siblings and parents. And so it's just a mess, is basically what it is. What happens with an enmeshed relationship is there's this component of emotional involvement, emotional dependency that is not healthy. So some of the characteristics of enmeshed relationships include a lack of privacy, a constant need for approval, and an over-involvement in each other's lives. With the relationship we had with my in-laws, how I figured out that things were enmeshed is every time we made any kind of decision, there was this long explanation that had to go into it. We had to go through all the details. My mother-in-law wanted details to the most specific detail, and it was just maddening. It was absolutely crazy because it felt like every time we gave all this information, she wanted more, and she had enough fuel to pick apart any decision we made and tell us why it was wrong and why we needed to do something differently. So enmeshed relationships, you can find it within marriages where the husband is constantly wanting to get permission from mommy and daddy to do certain things. Mom and dad, I've got this job offer. What should I do? Mom and dad, we're thinking about buying this house. What should I do? I'm thinking about moving here. What should I do? I'm thinking about going back to school. What should I do? It's a constant need for feedback in a loop that never, ever ends. And the lack of privacy also is an issue when your in-laws want to know about every single detail. They want to know where you're going. They want to know how long you're going to be there. They want to know who you're going to be with. And that's going above and beyond what a healthy relationship should look like. From my perspective, as a parent with adult children, I don't quiz my children when they get back from hanging out with their friends and expect to have a play-by-play recap of everything they've done. Do I want to know who was there? Yes. Do I want to know basically what they were doing? Yes. But other than that, I'm not going to ask all the little details that my husband was expected to give to his mom as a sign of, I don't know, like respect. I don't know. I don't understand what it's like to be in that position of having an enmeshed relationship with my parents. So I want to cover some of the things that you can look out for if you think or suspect that perhaps your husband might have an enmeshed relationship with someone in his family or with both of his parents, maybe with a sibling or whatever. These are some things to look out for. So some of the common signs of enmeshment include a difficulty making decisions independently, where your husband can't make a decision without talking to his parents first. Now, I will say there is a difference between seeking advice from parents on certain issues. If there's a big thing and you're in-laws have a certain area of expertise. Let's say your father-in-law is an engineer and your husband is looking at something engineering related. Yes, it makes sense that you would seek out their advice. But for every little decision, then it's kind of bordering on enmeshment. Another sign to look out for is your husband feeling responsible for the emotions and the problems of his parents. When we're adults, we kind of have to take responsibility for our own issues, our own emotions, and our own problems. But when you're in an enmeshed relationship, like I said before, the lines between individuals gets kind of blurry, and all of a sudden it's your husband's fault for mom and dad not being happy, or mom and dad struggling with finances, or mom and dad struggling with whatever. That's a definite sign to watch out for in terms of enmeshed relationships. And then something I've already talked about is a lack of personal space and boundaries. Again, wanting to know everything that's going on, wanting to know play by play of what you're doing. That's a definite sign. Also, excessive communication and interfering in personal matters. So let's say that you and your husband, maybe you had a disagreement over something, and all of a sudden your in-laws swoop in. No. That's not how it works. When you get married, you forsake all others. That means issues between you and your husband, provided that they are within the scope of healthy issues, they stay between you and your husband. Mommy and daddy do not need to get involved. Perhaps one of the wisest things that my mom told me very early on, maybe before my husband and I even got married, was she said, if you and your husband get into an argument, don't tell me. Number one, that's not my place. But number two, if you tell me something that upsets you, I, as your mother, am going to stay upset about it a whole lot longer than you will. You will find a way to forgive him. You will find a way to work it out and move on. But I will still be upset about whatever it is that your husband did to upset you. So you need to keep that to yourself, and issues between you and your husband need to stay within your marriage. And I thought that was really, really smart and a good piece of counsel from my mom. Now, how can an enmeshed relationship affect your marriage? Well, from personal experience, I can tell you that we had some conflicts over boundaries with his parents and our own personal independence. My husband didn't always see that there was something wrong with leaning on his parents for certain things, whether it was finding a place to live, whether it was decisions. I wanted to be able to just discuss it with my husband and that be it, and not have to deal with any other outside input. Another way that it can affect your marriage is feeling like you're number two in your marriage after your in-laws. And there were times when I expressed to my husband that I felt like he was picking their side over mine. And that's not healthy, obviously. You want to feel like you each have each other's back, that I'm my husband's number one and he's my number one, period. And that is how it should be. That is a proper order of a Catholic marriage, is to have your relationship with God, obviously, is first. The relationship with your spouse is second. Then the relationship with your children is third. And then every other relationship, whether it's with work, whether it's with hobbies or extended family, those come after. And so when you start mixing up the order of things, that's not how the Catholic Church has said this is the proper order of a family. Another thing that you can be dealing with because of an enmeshed relationship is just being burnt out emotionally because of constant involvement in issues with your extended family. If there's issues with your in-laws, they need to deal with them themselves. And for you and your family to be dragged into it, it's exhausting. It's truly exhausting. What about how this affects our children? First off, confusion. Your kids will be confused about boundaries and roles within your family. They need to know that your family is an independent, autonomous unit. They don't have to have grandma and grandpa's approval for things. They're their own person. They can discuss things with you, their parents, and grandma and grandpa are outside of that. So there can be confusion if they are looking towards grandma and grandpa are saying one thing and mom and dad are saying another thing. A child shouldn't have to pick between parents and grandparents as to who they're going to follow for guidance. Another thing is a child can feel really stressed out because they're caught in the middle of family conflicts. If there's an issue going on between your parents and your grandparents, it's going to be confusing for the child because they will want everybody to get along. And so there's a level of distress that comes with enmeshed families where if there's any kind of issue with harmony, it's going to affect your children. And then one last thing to mention is that by giving our kids an example of enmeshed relationships, that's giving them an unhealthy example of what a relationship is and what independence looks like. So it's really important to keep all these things in mind to shield our children from them. We need to shield our children and protect them from an enmeshed family dynamic so that we can make sure that their emotional well-being is kept as healthy as possible. So let's say you've been listening and you're thinking, okay, my husband probably has an enmeshed relationship with his family. What do I do? How do I talk about this with him? Obviously, anytime that you are going to be talking about something that's a sensitive issue where there's a chance that he might not react favorably or might get upset, it's important to choose a calm, private time to talk. Supper time when the kids are going bonkers, that's not the time. Pick a time when it's just the two of you where you can sit down and talk about this calmly and privately. Another thing that keep in mind is to use I statements like, I feel like this. I feel like that. I have seen this. I've experienced that. Using I statements are really great to not put the blame on him, because what happens if you start to blame somebody, they immediately will want to defend themselves. Then I would encourage you to find some specific examples to show how the enmeshment is affecting your marriage and your family. Always, when you have discussions with your husband, really try to emphasize the fact that you want to strengthen your marriage, that you want to strengthen your family, that that's your goal. And then find ways that you can work together to set some healthy boundaries with your husband's family. Now, let's say you have this discussion with your husband and he is open to addressing these relationships, what can you do? The first thing you can do is try to identify and find a way to articulate what your own personal needs and boundaries are. And then encourage your husband to do the same thing and then support each other. You should also be careful to limit oversharing and excessive involvement with your extended family members. Oversharing is one of the hallmarks of enmeshment. And so you want to be very careful about, really pulling back on what you say to your in-laws so that you don't start crossing the line into oversharing. If this is a prolonged issue, if you're not seeing a lot of progress, I would suggest finding a good Catholic counselor, a good Catholic therapist to talk about what's going on and how to really work and heal the relationships so that enmeshment is no longer an issue. And of course, through all of this, pray, be patient, be as understanding as you can be, because this will be an adjustment. It's been over 5 years since we went no contact with my husband's family, and my husband knows that he was enmeshed and still has some issues sometimes with expecting and also oversharing with the kids. It's not bad by any means, but sometimes it's old habits die hard. And if you listen to the podcast that I did, it was episode 25, talking about why your husband can't change. A lot of it has to do with neural pathways and how his brain was trained to think. The enmeshed way of being in a relationship is a really, really hard thing to break. And so definitely have patience and understanding with him as he's working through the process of breaking those thought patterns. I would encourage you to really think about this. Think about, is there some enmeshment issues with your in-laws? Do they constantly expect you to overshare? Do they expect a lot more information from you? Then find ways to discuss it with your husband. Again, with some good examples, but again, not in a blaming way, but just, I've noticed that when we do this, your parents act this way. Those are ways to bring up the topic in the least threatening way possible with your husband so that you can make some progress, so that you can really strengthen your marriage, because that's really the goal, right? We want to have strong Catholic marriages that honor God and bring glory to Him and make our marriage attractive to other people so that they desire God as well in their marriage. So having an enmeshed relationship it's really, really hard, but you can overcome it. And so I hope that the tips and the ideas that I shared today are an opportunity for you to start breaking down the unhealthy patterns in the relationship that you might have with your toxic in-laws and start to rebuild them in a healthier way so that you can all serve God in the way that He would have you serve Him. God bless you. Go in peace. Thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode. If you've ever wondered just how toxic your relationship with your in-laws really is, I've got the perfect tool for you. Introducing the new free Toxic In-Laws Assessment, a self-graded quiz designed to help you identify the true level of toxicity in your relationship with your in-laws. Whether you're unsure if your in-laws are really that bad or you think they might be worse than you realize, this assessment will give you the clarity you need. Don't leave it to guesswork. Take the free Toxic In-Laws Assessment now and start your journey towards healthier and more peaceful family dynamics. Visit desiringpeace.com/quiz to get started. Disclaimer. All content and information on this podcast and our website, including our programs, products, and/or services, is for information and educational purposes only and does not constitute professional medical, psychiatric, or mental health advice of any kind, and does not establish any kind of professional client relationship by your listening to this podcast or use of my website. A professional client relationship with you is only formed after we have expressly entered into a written agreement with you that you have signed, including our fee structure and other terms to work with you in a specific matter. Although we strive to provide accurate general information, the information presented here is not a substitute for any kind of professional advice, and you should not rely solely on this information. Always consult a professional in the area for your particular needs and circumstances prior to making any professional, medical, or mental health related decisions.